Hey everyone, welcome to the vlog. For those of you that are subscribers of mine, you'll know that I sometimes like to, in fact frequently, I like to delve into rock and roll history topics when I'm not doing my own gigs and traveling and touring and stuff. The name of this vlog, after all, is Graham Strang's Roots and Roots, and I called it that because on top of following my own career, I wanted to talk about the roots and roots and the history of rock and roll. But today I'm going to be branching out a little bit. I am going to be venturing outside of the world of rock and roll to talk about this next artist. Now, as you've guessed from the title of this video today, I'm talking about Dal Richards. Who is in Dal Richards? That's a name you probably won't recognize if you're from outside of BC, or at least outside of Canada, as he wasn't like an international superstar or anything. But he was sort of a regional icon for Vancouver and its area and BC as a whole. He is renowned for leading the Dal Richards Orchestra for many years, for his talent on the saxophone and the clarinet, I believe. But more than anything, and what I'm going to talk about today, is his insane longevity. I mean, I really can't imagine a performer even. I don't think it's even possible for a performer to have a longer career than Dal did, and that's sort of my lifelong goal. Is if I can have a career that's half as long as his was, and that would be a tremendous, overwhelming success. So I'm just going to get right into it because it's a fascinating story. Dal Richards was born, I believe he was born in the Vancouver area back in 1918, and he graduated from high school in Vancouver in either 1935 or 36, and pretty immediately after that, he founded the Dal Richards Orchestra, got an 11-piece band behind him, and they started playing gigs and functions and dances and anywhere they could play, basically. And it only took them I should mention, it was around that time when the band was just getting started in the late 30s that first of all they began playing a New Year's Eve show every year. That was very important for Dal to get a New Year's Eve booking every year, and I'll come back to that later. And another thing he would do every year would be the Dal Richards Orchestra would be sort of the house band, if you will, for the Pacific National Exhibition, the PNE, which is an annual exposition held in Vancouver every year for the past 100-some-odd years. And it's a major regional event. And yeah, since the late 30s, the Dal Richards Orchestra were always a feature there, just every year, year in and year out, except for the couple of years that it didn't run during the Second World War. By 1940, only a couple of years into the orchestra's existence, they had gained so much regional popularity that Dal was able to sign to become the new band, replacing Mark Kenny and his Western Gentlemen, as the new band to play every Saturday night at the Panorama Room, which was high atop the Hotel Vancouver, as Dal loved to say. He would always say, I used to play at the Panorama Room, high above the Hotel Vancouver. Yeah, I believe that's how the radio show was introduced as well. And that's what made that such a big gig, is not only was it a huge gig just in Vancouver, it was broadcast every week by the CBC. So it was originally Dal just signed on to do it for 6 weeks. This for 6 weeks in 1940 or 41, depending on the source you find on the internet. The Dal Richards Orchestra was scheduled to play on that radio show live at the Hotel Vancouver, but needless to say, the contract was extended and then extended and extended and extended and extended once again, and he became sort of their de facto house band for many years and decades afterwards. Yeah, they were a heavily in-demand band in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. They just kept on going. In the summer of 1964, the Dal Richards Orchestra played an event that was majorly important to the history of Vancouver, but also would sort of be an odd precursor for what would become the downfall of the popularity of the orchestra. They played technically as the first opening act for the Beatles when they came to Vancouver and played the Empire Field. So when the Beatles played the Empire Field, their opening acts included such groups as the Righteous Brothers. But before all of them, just while people were literally filing into the stadium, Dal Richards' orchestra was playing. They were the first thing people heard, just kind of almost as overture music, if you could sort of say, as people were filing to their seats and whatnot. And they played a rousing set of their favorite tunes. But yeah, the Beatles sparked what was to come. And I mean, you already had Elvis and all the 50s rock stars before that, but the sort of nightclub style swing and / jazz music was still very popular. But when the Beatles came along, it really just shifted everyone's attention towards rock and roll. And the touring jazz big band orchestras sort of started to fall by the wayside. And in 1965, after 25 glorious years, the CBC canceled the radio program, and Dal stopped doing the weekly show from the Hotel Vancouver. Still, 25 years is an excellent run. And after that, Dal didn't retire from the music business by any means. He continued to uphold his annual PNE concerts for years and years and years after that, as well as continuing to play a New Year's Eve booking every single year. But in order to get some supplemental income, he actually went back to school to train to get a degree in hotel management, and that's what he would do in the late 60s and 70s. He was in hotel management with an awesome jazz big band orchestra behind him as it became a moonlighting gig. And yeah, that's how he kept his career afloat through the 1970s. But in the 1980s, something major happened in the swing world. It had a major resurgence. Funny how musical styles tend to do that. About 15-20 years after they come out of favor, there's a whole new wave of nostalgia that hits, and Dal Richards was majorly swept up in that. Yeah, during this time, Dal Richards released this album. Whoa, it's backwards. And it's the wrong one. Dal Richards' Swing Is In, Let's Dance, with Dal Richards and his orchestra. There he is. Which just came out in about 1982. And then that album sold so well for him that the following year put out Swing Is In Volume 2. Glad to have both of those. Really cool. Nice little artifacts from the resurgence of Dal Richards' career in the 1980s. And he was able to, even though he was in his 60s by this point, he was able to make music his full-time gig again. He was famous in the 80s for performing, maybe even as early as the 60s. I'm trying to think when he did this, but he performed, I don't know if he wrote it, but he performed the, Roar Lions Roar, the BC Lions theme song. I believe he played at the opening of BC Place in 1983. He definitely played at the Expo 86 festivities, which in 1986, Vancouver, BC. I should do a video on this expo at some point. Vancouver did the last of the World's Fairs, essentially. To be held in North America, at least. It was the last of the World's Fairs. And Dal Richards was one of the performers for that, because Vancouver loves Dal Richards. And by this point, he'd been a part of Vancouver culture for half a century. So, yeah, they had to feature him, and it was great that they did. He continued to do regular bookings through the 1990s and through the 2000s. He just would not stop. And in 2008, so on January 5th, I guess, 2008, which was his 90th birthday, I think it was on that date, he performed a gig at the Orpheum Theater. Yes, I'm blowing all the way ahead to 2008, which was his 90th birthday, because his career is so long that if I was to cover it year by year in detail, this video would be 3 hours long. But yeah, by 2008, he was 90 and showing no signs of retiring, just kept on going. And yeah, he sold out the Orpheum for his 90th birthday. And that wasn't even a retirement gig. It wasn't like he was going to do this big last concert and walk out into the sunset. No, he continued to perform for years after that. One of the big prides for him in his later life was, well, first of all, he got to do a new radio show for the last 10 or 15 years of his life on the Oldies channel. It was a radio show that even I would tune into all the time, where he would just talk up 40s, 50s, and 60s big band recordings that he enjoyed from his collection and whatnot. It was a really cool show that he did for several years. And then another major pride for him later in life was, by the time he was 92 in 2010, he was actually one of the Olympic torch runners for the Olympic Games when they came to Vancouver. That was really cool. Yeah, he trained and he ran well for a 92-year-old. By this point, I'd seen Dal Richards and his orchestra live a few times. Just by virtue of going to the PNE with my family every year. I would see that band there every year, and until I looked it up at some point in West Florida, I had no idea that was the same orchestra with the same leader. I mean, obviously the members of the orchestra changed over the years, but that same band leader from the 1930s at the PNE was still playing there. Unbelievable. And he kept up his New Year's Eve performances as well. He always said that it was, and it's true, that the amount of year by year New Year's Eve performances that he did was enough for a Guinness World Record. It just was, but unfortunately he just didn't keep, in fact, I'm not even sure there were detailed enough records of his earlier performances for Guinness to allow it to be actually submitted into the Guinness Book of World Records, but while it can't be 100% proved with documents, we all know that Dal did it. In 2013, to celebrate his 95th birthday, the city of Vancouver named him an honorary Hepcat laureate, whatever that means. But he performed at the festivities for that and seemed to really appreciate that. That was cool. Now, by 2014, Dal Richards was 94, or 96 rather, and you'd think that he would have retired by then, but no, he played the full year's worth of gigs. But privately, he was telling his band and people closest to him that this would likely be his last year performing and that he was going to retire. By this point, I'd actually been able to meet him a couple of times. I volunteered at the Act Theatre, which is a local theatre here in Maple Ridge, and Dal Richards used to roll through town every year with his orchestra and play a Remembrance Day show here at the theatre. So I got to meet him and help him set it up. I set up the stage, which to me, just knowing the history of Dal Richards' orchestra, just to be able to be there and helping set up his orchestra stage was like, it was a big moment. And I got to meet him, which was really cool. And in 2014, he performed at the PNE for the 75th straight year. Not straight year because there were those couple of years in the early 1940s, like I said earlier, that the PNE did not operate. But with the exception of those, he played every year for a total of 75 annual appearances. That's just incredible. And then in November of that year, he came back to the Maple Ridge Act Theatre that I'd played at, but that gig was billed as Dal Richards' sort of farewell performance in Maple Ridge. It was said this would be his last annual gig here, and so people showed up in droves and sold out the place, of course. And Dal came out 2 months shy of his 97th birthday and absolutely delivered an amazing show. There's two things from that gig that I will never forget. First of all, they were doing wartime songs because this was a Remembrance Day event. Dal went on stage and he asked the audience, "All right, I'm going to do a song from we're going to do a song from World War One. Was anyone out there in the audience born during World War One by chance? Was anyone here alive during World War One? And absolutely no one put up their hand. And Dal was like, well, I was. And the crowd cheered him on for that because it's absolutely true. He was born January 5th, 1918 during World War One. So at that event, Dal Richards was not only the star of the show and the band leader, but he was the oldest person in the auditorium, which is funny. And then later at the end of the show, when he was just like walking off stage, saying goodbye to the crowd, knowing that this was scheduled to be his last performance in Maple Ridge, someone in the front row-ish yelled, "Come back next year, Dal! Come back!" And it was so funny. Dal walks back to the mic and he says, "I'll try to organize a second coming." And he walks off stage. I just thought that was so funny. That was such a clever, quick line by Dal. That did wind up going on to be his last show in Maple Ridge. About a month and a bit later, he did indeed play one more New Year's Eve show at the River Rock. These consecutive New Year's performances were not all at the same venue, but he played at the River Rock for the last 10, 20 years of that. And that marked his 79th consecutive New Year's Eve show. He was determined to come back the following year to make it an even 80. But after that performance, he entered a sort of stage of semi-retirement. The following year, he did certain interview appearances and the odd concert here and there. He did continue to perform some concerts in 2015, including one in Whistler, but he did not play his usual P&E gigs, which was a shame. But one interesting thing he was interviewed for in 2015 was the 80th anniversary of the Kitsilano rowboat stage, or the Kitsilano riverboat, rather, I think. And the reason it was interesting that he's interviewed for that is because I believe he was part of the choir or band or whatever it was that had performed on that stage for its grand opening celebrations 80 years earlier in 1935. So to have him there being interviewed 80 years later was absolutely incredible. He gave his last interview for CBC Radio in November. He had scheduled to perform one more New Year's Eve show at the River Rock to bring in the new year of 2016, but a few weeks before that performance he had to cancel due to illness. But I think this is one of the more interesting and poignant parts of his career is how it ended. And he technically never missed a New Year's Eve performance because he passed away, I believe it was 19 minutes to midnight on December 31st, 2015. So he missed out on being around for 2016 by 19 minutes. But it's interesting. It's interesting that by doing that, he technically never let a New Year's Eve go by that he didn't play. That pretty much covers the entire 80-plus year history of Dal Richards' career in Vancouver. It's been a long video, but hey, I'm talking about a really long career, aren't I? And I'm going to show you guys one of my favorite possessions that I had signed for me by Dal Richards at the PNE in 2012. That's 2 Graham, Dal Richards, PNE 2012. That was his 73rd annual PNE performance out of 75. One of the few times I got to meet him. And yeah, that's going to do it for this video. I just thought that I would be remiss if I didn't talk about him at some point during this vlog. I was always fascinated by his career. Hopefully you learned something today. If any of my information here was inaccurate, then please let me know in the comments. I always love to learn more new things. That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. For those of you who don't know, I am also a professional musician myself, and you can check out a full list of all my upcoming concert dates in the description. Also in the description are links to where you can find my music, where it's sold or streamed online. Like this video if you liked what you saw. Subscribe to this channel if you've been enjoying my videos. And you can even ring the notification bell if you want to be notified every time I upload a new video, which should be tomorrow and most days for the foreseeable future, as this is a daily vlog, more or less. I wind up doing it about 5 days a week. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you with another new vlog hopefully again tomorrow. See you then.